You need to step away from that display. Right now. The shout cut through the auction hall so hard that conversations crashed to a stop. An elderly black woman stood inches from the glass case, her hand gripping the velvet rope as if it were the only steady thing in the room. Across from her, Richard Hale was already red in the face, his voice rising with every word. "I've told you twice," he snapped, pointing toward the exit. "This is a private auction. You do not belong here." "I absolutely do," the woman replied. Her calm tone only made him angrier. A man near the front muttered, "Oh hell, here we go." Richard laughed sharply. "You hear that? She thinks she belongs." He looked around the room for support. "This is $1 million room, not a shelter." Gasps rippled. Someone hissed, "That's harsh." The woman didn't flinch. "I came for that item," she said, pointing at the artifact. "And I'm not moving." That did it. Richard slapped his auction badge against his chest. "That object is worth more than your entire neighborhood." A woman in pearls whispered, "Security should have stopped this." The old woman turned slowly, meeting Richard's eyes. "You're selling stolen property," she said. The crowd erupted. "What? Did she just accuse him? Someone record this." Richard's voice rose. "That's a lie. You forged the paperwork," she continued, louder now. "You erased a bloodline." Richard stepped closer, invading her space. "You don't get to walk in here and make wild claims because you feel emotional." "Emotional?" she repeated. "You mean angry that you dug up my ancestors and put a price tag on them?" Someone near the back said, "Jesus!" Richard barked, "Security!" 2 guards rushed in, but the crowd was already buzzing, half standing now. "Get her out," someone shouted. "She's embarrassing herself," another voice said. Richard pointed aggressively toward the doors. "The bus stop is outside, ma'am, before I have you removed." That's when the woman's voice changed, not louder, heavier. "You took that relic from my family estate in 1989, she said. "Filed it under a dissolved trust that never existed." Richard froze for half a second, just long enough. Then he snapped, "This woman is mentally confused." The crowd reacted instantly. "That's messed up," someone said. "Why does she know dates?" Another whispered. The woman lifted her hand and pointed to the artifact again. "Turn it," she said. "Show them the back." Richard laughed nervously. "There's nothing. There's a mourning sigil," she interrupted. "Carved by my grandmother after her brother was lynched. You didn't know what it meant, did you?" The room went dead silent. A phone dropped to the floor. Richard's face drained of color. That's impossible," he stammered. One guard checked his tablet again. "Sir, she's registered, full access." Richard snapped his head around. "Under what name?" The woman stepped forward, voice steady but commanding. "You'll hear it announced." The auctioneer's bell rang loud, final. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice boomed, "please take your seats. We are live in 30 seconds. Cameras switched on. Red lights blinked. The woman walked past Richard slowly, deliberately, and sat in the front row, dead center. Richard stood there, surrounded by whispers, staring at the artifact like it had just turned on him. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a public fight, and the whole world was about to watch him lose it. The auctioneer cleared his throat on the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience." "Hold it." Richard Hale's voice cut across the stage, sharp and forced into control. He stepped forward, flashing a tight smile at the audience. "Before we proceed," he said, "we have a small disruption that needs to be handled." A wave of whispers rolled through the hall. "Disruption? She's still here. This is getting uncomfortable." Richard turned toward the old woman seated in the front row. "Ma'am," he said, his voice syrupy now, "let's be reasonable." She didn't look at him. She looked at the artifact. "You accused this house of theft," Richard continued. "That's a serious claim, one that could ruin reputations." "You already ruined them," she replied quietly. The crowd leaned in. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice, but the microphone caught every word. "You don't want to do this," he said. "Not like this." A man in the second row whispered, "What's he trying to hide?" Richard straightened and addressed the room. "This item," he announced, gesturing to the glass case, "was recovered from a legally dissolved estate. No heirs, no living claimants." "That's a lie," the woman said, a few gasps. Richard ignored her and continued, louder now. "We've verified its history with independent experts." "Experts you paid," she shot back. The room buzzed. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else said, "Damn." Richard clenched his jaw. He leaned down toward her again. "Let's talk privately," he said through his teeth. "I'm willing to make this worth your while." That got attention. The woman finally turned to face him. "Say that again," she said. Richard smiled thinly. "We can arrange compensation, a donation. A settlement, you walk away, everyone wins." The crowd murmured louder now. "Is he bribing her?" "That mic is still on." The woman stood up slowly. "I didn't come for your money," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "I came for the truth." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then growing. Richard raised his hands. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle." But it already was. A man near the aisle shouted, "Then explain the carving." "Yes," someone yelled. "Turn it around," Richard snapped. "This is not how auctions work." The auctioneer looked helpless, sweat dripping down his face. The woman stepped closer to the stage. "Ask him why the inventory photo cuts off the back," she said to the crowd. "Ask him why the appraisal report skips 1987 to 1992. Richard's eyes widened. "Security," he hissed again. The guards didn't move. One of them said quietly, "Sir, maybe we should let her speak." That betrayal hit him harder than anything. Richard grabbed the microphone. "This woman is exploiting history to create drama," he barked. "This artifact is mine to sell." The word echoed. "Mine." The woman lifted her chin. "You never owned it," she said. "You hid it." She reached into her coat pocket. The room froze. Richard's voice cracked. "What are you doing?" She pulled out a folded yellow document. "Original estate ledger," she said, "with your father's signature." The crowd erupted. "His father? Oh my God. This is insane." Richard stumbled back a step. "That document is fake," he shouted. "This whole thing is a setup." The woman handed the paper to the auctioneer. "Read the margin notes," she said. "The ink changes when exposed to heat." Cameras zoomed in. The auctioneer's hands shook. Richard realized too late that the crowd was no longer on his side. And then the woman said the words that changed everything. "I'm not here as a bidder," she said. "I'm here as the owner." The room exploded. Richard laughed hysterically. "Owner of what?" She looked straight into the camera. "Of this auction house." Silence slammed down like a door. Richard's smile collapsed. Because in that moment he understood this wasn't a protest. This wasn't an accusation. This was a takeover. Richard laughed. It was loud, forced. The kind of laugh people use when they're drowning and don't want anyone to see the water. "This is ridiculous," he said, waving his hand toward the audience. "You're all watching a performance." No one laughed with him. The woman stood beside the stage now, calm as stone. "Turn on the overhead lights," she said. The auctioneer hesitated. "Ma'am, do it," she repeated. Something in her voice made him obey. The lights above the artifact flared brighter, washing the stage in white. She pointed to the glass case. "Rotate it," she said. Slowly, Richard shook his head. "This is unnecessary." But a technician stepped forward and turned the display. The back of the artifact came into view. The room sucked in a collective breath. Carved deep into the wood was a symbol, deliberate, personal, unmistakable. The woman spoke before anyone else could. "That mark was never documented," she said, "because it was carved after the inventory photos were taken." A man in the crowd whispered. "Then how did she know?" Richard swallowed hard. She continued. "The mourning sigil wasn't decorative. It was a record, a timestamp. My grandmother carved it the night she buried her brother." The room was silent except for camera shutters. Richard snapped, "This proves nothing." The woman turned to the auctioneer. "Read the ledger." The auctioneer unfolded the fragile paper. "Out loud," she added. He cleared his throat. "Entry dated March 3rd, 1989. Item removed temporarily for restoration. Custody transferred to R. Hale S.R." A low growl rippled through the crowd. Richard stepped forward. "That was legal." The woman didn't even look at him. "Read the margin," she said. The auctioneer squinted. There's a handwritten note." He hesitated. The woman nodded. "Read it." The auctioneer swallowed. "No consent obtained. Family displaced. Property unresolved." The crowd erupted. "That's theft. He admitted it." "Oh my God," Richard shouted. "That note was never validated." The woman raised her hand. "Check the ink." A technician held a heat lamp over the page. Slowly, painfully slowly, hidden writing bloomed into view. Gasps filled the room. Another note appeared. "Forged transfer after 5 years. Statute will cover it." Richard staggered back. "That's not real," he whispered. The woman finally faced him. "You watched your father steal," she said. "Then you finished the job." Richard screamed. "You can't prove that." She gestured to the screens. "Zoom in on the signature." The cameras did. 2 signatures sat side by side, same flourish, same pressure marks, forgery clear as daylight. The auctioneer's voice shook. "Sir, these documents are falsified." Richard's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The woman took the microphone. "For 36 years," she said, "my family was told the estate was gone. That history had no value." She looked straight into the main camera. "Tonight you saw what stolen history looks like when it tries to pass as luxury." The room erupted in applause. Richard looked around wildly. "No," he muttered. "This isn't happening." She turned to security. "Lock the doors," she said. The police are already on their way. Richard snapped his head up. You can't do that. She met his eyes, cold and absolute. Yes, she said, I can. He fell silent, because in that moment Richard Hale wasn't an art dealer. He was a suspect, and the world had just watched the proof unfold live. The first siren cut through the building like a blade. Then another. Then several more. Every head in the auction hall turned toward the glass entrance as blue and red lights began flashing across the marble walls. Richard Hale's face drained of color. No, he whispered. No, 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 this is a misunderstanding. The woman didn't respond. She stood calmly near the stage, hands folded, watching as reality finally caught up to him. The doors swung open. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a detective in a dark suit. Cameras swiveled instantly. Phones shot into the air. The detective raised his badge. Richard Hale, he said loudly, you are under investigation for grand larceny, fraud, and possession of stolen cultural property. The room erupted. Oh my God, they really came? This is live. Richard took a step back. You can't do this here, he said desperately. Not in front of everyone. The detective didn't blink. Turn around, he ordered. Richard looked to the auctioneer, to the guards, to the crowd. No one helped him. One officer reached for his arm. Richard jerked away. Wait, I can explain, the woman finally spoke. You already did, she said, for years. The officer twisted Richard's arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs echoed louder than the sirens, gasps, applause, shouts. About time. He thought he was untouchable, Richard's voice cracked. She set me up, the detective shook his head. You set yourself up, he gestured to the artifact. That piece has been reported missing since 1989. We've been waiting for it to surface. Richard's knees buckled. As officers escorted him toward the exit, he locked eyes with the woman. Who are you? He demanded hoarsely. She didn't answer. Not yet. The crowd parted as Richard was dragged past them, past the velvet ropes, past the cameras, past the life he thought he owned. The doors closed behind him. Silence followed. Then the detective turned back to the woman. Ma'am, he said respectfully, we'll need your formal statement. She nodded. Of course. The auctioneer approached, shaking. I had no idea, he stammered. You weren't supposed to, she replied. That's how theft survives. The detective cleared his throat and faced the room. The auction is suspended. The artifact is being returned to its rightful owner. Every eye turned to the woman. Whispers filled the space. Owner? She really was telling the truth. She stepped forward. The sale is canceled, she said clearly. Effective immediately. No one argued, because the woman everyone tried to throw out had just shut the whole place down. The auction hall stayed silent long after the doors closed behind Richard Hale. No music, no bidding. No movement, just dozens of wealthy people standing in the aftermath of a lie finally collapsing. The woman walked slowly toward the stage. Every step echoed now. The auctioneer stepped aside without being asked. She picked up the microphone, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the weight of someone who had waited a lifetime. My name, she said, is Evelyn Carter Blackwood. A murmur rippled through the room. One man's eyes widened. Blackwood? Yes, she continued. My grandfather founded this auction house in 1946. When banks wouldn't lend to black families, he built something that couldn't be taken with silence. People shifted uncomfortably. My family didn't lose this place, she said. We were pushed out of it. She turned toward the artifact. That relic was never art. It was a record, a burial, a promise. Her voice softened. My grandmother used to say, they can take the land, but they can't take the truth. She looked directly into the main camera. For decades, people like Richard Hale believed history was something you could bury, reframe, and sell back at a markup. The crowd stayed silent. Tonight, she said, you saw what happens when stolen history speaks. She handed the microphone back. The detective approached. The artifact will be returned to your estate within 48 hours. Evelyn nodded. Thank you, she turned to the crowd one last time. This house will reopen, she said, but not as a place that profits from stolen stories. She paused. It will be a place where provenance finally means truth. Applause broke out, slow at first, then overwhelming. Not polite applause, earned applause. As people began to file out, one woman whispered, I thought she was poor. Evelyn heard it. She smiled gently. I was never poor, she said. I was robbed. The camera lingered on the artifact as officers carefully lifted it from the glass case. Not as merchandise, but as home.